Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am one who has supported Representative Ron Paul in his campaign for the presidency for a long time. I supported him during his run in 2008, and in 2012 I was involved extensively in an attempt to help him win. I donated money to his campaign. I made numerous video commentaries in support of his campaign and in particular of his message. Furthermore, I became a delegate to the Nevada State Republican Convention, where we were able to elect a majority slate of Ron Paul supporters to go on to the Republican National Convention in Tampa. So, when I speak today, I speak as someone who has stood with Representative Paul up until now. And I speak as someone who is tremendously disappointed in the actions of his son, Senator Rand Paul, who on June 7th, on Sean Hannity's TV show, outright endorsed Mitt Romney for president. Now, if there's one candidate among all of the Republicans who were running in 2012 who is the most removed from my idea of what a good president would be, a proper liberty-respecting president, it is Mitt Romney. And Rand Paul gave some flimsy excuses for supporting Mitt Romney. First, he stated that, well, their family lives and family structures are rather similar, and Mitt Romney seems like he's a good family man. Well, I'm not in a position to judge that. He may well be. I don't know. But that is not a reason to support or oppose someone as a candidate. Whether or not Mitt Romney has a good family life is irrelevant to the kinds of positions that he has espoused and the kinds of policies that he would pursue as president. I can support any individual, irrespective of his family life, for president, as long as that individual has behaved in a manner that he or she would consider one of integrity, and as long as that person's principles and policies would align with what I would expect from someone in the office of president. So if somebody would promote more individual freedom, greater room for entrepreneurship and innovation in a free market, greater room for technological progress, an end to inflationism and military interventionism, an end to the heinous wars on drugs and wars on terror and wars on human beings, I would support that individual. It doesn't matter what his or her age or background or personal circumstances are. Then, Rand Paul stated that there were some similarities between his positions and Mitt Romney's, and he mentioned several that were astonishing to me, alleging that Mitt Romney would support internet freedom, as if Mitt Romney hadn't always sided with the big lobbying interests when it came to issues of individuals using the internet versus large politically connected firms that try to dominate the flow of content on the internet. And with regard to Mitt Romney supporting a sound and restrained foreign policy, I just have to shake my head. Because Mitt Romney is more belligerent than Barack Obama. And Obama's foreign policy has been among the most belligerent in US history. Remember, Barack Obama is the president who has asserted that he has the power to unilaterally decide to assassinate any individual abroad, including American citizens. Mitt Romney has repeatedly stated that Obama is not hawkish enough, not strong enough on foreign policy. Ron Paul's message has consistently been one of non-interventionism, one of getting the United States out of various foreign occupations. Ron Paul has held to that message much longer than I have, and in fact, he has convinced me to adopt that message. So when his son goes out to say that Mitt Romney's hawkish positions somehow reflect a non-interventionist message, I see that as truly disingenuous. Now, I realize Rand Paul is not Ron Paul. There are differences between generations in a family, and I would not judge a person by either his parents or his children. I'm an individualist. I don't believe in blood guilt going either way. So, what Rand Paul has said is not necessarily a reflection on Ron Paul and Ron Paul's own positions. However, Ron Paul's campaign did send out an email to his supporters on Wednesday, June 7th, essentially conceding that Ron Paul would not be the nominee, that it would not be mathematically possible. However, the email stated that he's still happy with all the delegates that the campaign has amassed through caucuses and state conventions, such as the one in Nevada where I participated. And that's all well and good. It's good to have people who support the message of liberty, and it's good to have them promote that message. I agree that at this point, it would not be possible for Ron Paul to become the nominee of the Republican Party unless some extraordinary and completely unforeseen contingency happens, like a very, very bad scandal relating to Mitt Romney's past gets revealed and completely ruins his reputation. Of course, several such scandals have already been revealed, like Mitt Romney, essentially in his high school days, tackling a classmate who had long hair and forcibly cutting off that hair and hurting his classmate in the process simply because he thought it was, quote, sissy to have long hair on a man. Or the story about Mitt Romney transporting his dog in very unpleasant and cramped conditions on the top of his vehicle and essentially just hosing it down every once in a while to clean up the mess. So those scandals weren't enough to topple Mitt Romney's candidacy, and if those weren't enough, I don't know what would be enough. So realistically, Mitt Romney is going to be the Republican nominee. I concede that. But that's no reason to support him, and that's no reason to be happy about it or to endorse Mitt Romney. The Ron Paul campaign should have taken the position and should have made the position clear to all individuals who were prominently representing the Ron Paul campaign, such as Rand Paul, that they're in it until the end. They're in it until the Republican National Convention in Tampa, when the formal decision would be made as to who is the nominee. And in the meantime, irrespective of whether or not it's possible mathematically for Ron Paul to be selected as the nominee, prominent representatives of the Ron Paul campaign shouldn't go off endorsing Mitt Romney, who is the archetype of the establishment. Mitt Romney does not have a single principle to which he has adhered consistently throughout his career. When he was governor of Massachusetts, he enacted a health insurance reform package that is very similar in substance to the Affordable Care Act that has been championed by Barack Obama. Now Mitt Romney opposes the Affordable Care Act, including the provision of the health insurance mandate, which was the cornerstone of both the Affordable Care Act and Romney's reforms in Massachusetts, and he opposes the Affordable Care Act only because that is what is politically expedient. Mitt Romney has switched his positions on the issue of abortion, and while I recognize that it's possible for a person to change his or her mind on that issue, I don't think he did it in a genuine fashion. Mitt Romney has supported the TARP bailouts. Mitt Romney has supported the prosecution of Bradley Manning, and he has supported that prosecution to the extent of accusing the Obama administration of not being vigorous enough, even though Bradley Manning was subjected to conditions of de facto torture. Mitt Romney is not a friend of liberty, and even if he makes some token promises to either oppose certain deleterious legislation or support certain limitations on federal power, Those promises are just intended to get the Ron Paul supporters into his camp for the general election, because without them, Romney couldn't defeat Barack Obama. And in my view, he shouldn't be allowed to defeat Barack Obama. If this is the candidate that the Republican Party has fielded, despite the existence of a very principled alternative, then the Republican Party deserves to lose. And I don't like Barack Obama any more than most Republicans do, though probably my reasons for disliking him are quite different from those of most. I believe Barack Obama is quite an authoritarian president. He actually has more in common with authoritarian conservatives in the United States than with even some of the so-called liberal progressives whom he relied on as his base. But unfortunately, those liberal progressives are going to largely try to vote for Obama because they see him as the lesser of two evils. And this is so unfortunate, because had Ron Paul been running in the general election, he could have drawn people both from the principled right and from the principled left, and libertarians and independents, and people who have not been very politically involved in the past, but people who just want some freedom to live their own lives and freedom from inane intrusions by the federal government. So I think it's extremely disappointing. I think Rand Paul is, of course, trying to achieve some political gain for himself. He may be eyeing a presidential run in 2016 or 2020, and he doesn't want to alienate the Republican establishment. He doesn't want them to think that he would fall out of line with the party. He would rather pay his dues now to the presumptive nominee of the party, and that way assuage the establishment and essentially communicate to them that, look, even if he has disagreements, he will ultimately prefer the party over the principles of liberty. Now, that may be beneficial to Rand Paul's political career if the political situation in the United States stays roughly the same. But it is not beneficial to the principles of liberty. And it is not a strategy that I will stand behind. Maybe Rand Paul's ambitions are even greater. Maybe he wants to be Romney's vice presidential running mate. Maybe the Romney campaign thinks it can draw many Paul supporters in by making that pick. I don't know. I can tell you that if the Romney campaign makes that pick, it's not that the Romney campaign is going to draw in people like me, it's that Rand Paul is going to further alienate people like me. And I think many other principled libertarians are in that same position. There are many more general lessons to be drawn from this. I think it's very important to look at politics not in terms of candidates, but in terms of policies. I supported Ron Paul's campaign, and I still respect Ron Paul greatly. I think he has done a lot of good in the kinds of policies he has advocated, the kinds of votes he has cast, the kinds of educational efforts that he has conducted. Surely the American public is much better informed about the principles of liberty and individual rights and a restrained, non-interventionist foreign policy than it has been in the past 110 years at the very least. Surely the issue of the Federal Reserve has never had such prominence in American political discourse since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. The issue of inflation and its dangers has never had such prominence. So I greatly admire Ron Paul. My support for his candidacy was because I thought he could win, but it was also because of the principles that he espoused. And Rand Paul, I think, has departed from that. I think Rand Paul has certainly spoken some of the same ideas as Ron Paul. He has even voted in some of the same ways in the Senate. But ultimately, he has shown himself to be a much more, quote, pragmatic politician. What he's after is not winning on principled grounds, but it seems that he's after winning within the current structure, winning by placating the establishment. And that's a great disappointment to me. But what we, as Friends of Liberty, whether we're libertarians or we consider ourselves to have some other persuasion that includes the love of liberty and individualism and the progress of civilization, what we should think about is who is promoting the ideas now, and who is doing that in a consistent fashion. Furthermore, to achieve victory for particular ideas, it is very feasible and very legitimate to work with people who disagree with oneself. So I have no doubt that in future cases, Rand Paul is going to support some of the same policy changes that I would support. It may even be the case that Mitt Romney might support some of the same policy changes that I would support. And if and when they do that, my thought will be, great, we agree on something, let's work together to achieve it. And this would apply to anyone. It would apply to a Democratic politician, it would apply to an avowed socialist politician like Bernie Sanders. So I do think it's important to look at politics as policy rather than personalities. It's important not to blindly follow any one individual, whether it be Ron Paul or Rand Paul or anyone else who comes along. Because I think if people blindly follow one individual, and that individual commits a severe misstep, as Rand Paul has done, then there's bound to be disappointment and disillusionment. There is bound to be a perception that this was all of the nature of a scam, that people with principles were being strung along and essentially led to believe that this leader would accomplish some great reforms, when in fact this leader was angling for a better place within the status quo establishment. So with that being said, I think the 2012 election, the general election, presents a choice that's really not much of a choice for lovers of liberty. The Libertarian Party is fielding a candidate who has had a very strong pro-liberty record as governor of New Mexico. Two-time Governor Gary Johnson. He ran as a Republican before he dropped out and joined the Libertarian Party. And he has rightly expressed a desire to capitalize on the momentum that the Ron Paul campaign has accumulated. I think Gary Johnson, in this race, is a much more principled candidate than Mitt Romney, and I would support him hands down, even if Romney selects Rand Paul as his running mate. Because I think the Libertarian Party has a much greater opportunity to stand on principle, particularly on issues that would alienate a lot of the authoritarian conservatives, issues such as ending the war on drugs, or religious freedom, freedom from compulsory imposition of religion of the kind that, say, a lot of Bible Belt fundamentalist Christians would want to impose in this country. And furthermore, the Libertarian Party can take a much more principled stance on issues of foreign policy. So, at this point, I am intending to support and vote for Gary Johnson in the 2012 general election. This is going to be a protest vote against both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. It is also going to be a protest vote against the kinds of accommodation tactics that Rand Paul has been engaging in with regard to ingratiating himself with the political establishment. It is a protest vote against the entire political establishment as such. Because the political establishment in Washington, D.C. is responsible for the dramatic erosion of our individual liberties, for the kind of totalitarianism that we see at the airports right now, or the kind of wanton destruction that we see overseas, or the devaluation of our money. And it is time to put that to an end. I don't know who's going to win in 2012. Mitt Romney definitely deserves to lose, and the Republican Party deserves to keep losing as long as it keeps fielding unprincipled candidates who favor ever more authoritarianism, candidates like John McCain in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012. If the Republican Party ultimately learns its lesson and decides to select a principled candidate, say Gary Johnson in 2016, then I would support that individual. But there are also necessary avenues outside of politics that need to be pursued if we are to have more freedom. One great avenue is technology. The fact is, technology is much more directly empowering to individuals than even is political reform. And while a certain degree of political freedom is necessary for the technologies to emerge in the first place, once the technologies are here, they change the incentives under which individuals act. And within those incentives, individuals change culturally. They become a lot more inclined to support freedom if they experience it in their daily lives, and they experience the kinds of achievements that could be had through the exercise of their autonomy and their creative abilities. There are also a lot of voluntary innovations that are being pursued right now. One of these is the seasteading movement, which endeavors to create autonomous political communities where experimentation with political structures can occur much more quickly than in an established nation-state. That's a movement that should be encouraged and certainly should be monitored for the kinds of output that it produces. I think within the next 4 or 5 years, we will see some growth in that movement, and we will also see if its pioneers can achieve something that resonates with larger segments of the general public. Furthermore, innovations in longevity and healthcare, I think, are very important ultimately in bringing about a society of individuals who respect freedom. Because people who live longer and healthier lives feel more empowered, they feel more in control of themselves, and they have a longer-term orientation. They're not just looking out for the present moment or the next few years. They're thinking of their lives in terms of decades and hopefully in our lifetimes in terms of centuries. With that kind of orientation, people would begin to become a lot more interested in following the right principles, following the proper political order that respects liberty and individual rights. So on the fronts of technological growth, innovative voluntary associations such as seasteading, and extensions in human longevity, I see a lot more promise than in the kinds of political activism in which the Ron Paul campaign has engaged. I feel that the Ron Paul campaign has really motivated and mobilized a lot of people, including myself. However, the grassroots participants in the Ron Paul movement, I think, have been, in fact, better in their behavior and more effective than the actual centrally coordinated Ron Paul campaign. There's a great interview between Adam Kokesh and Penny Freeman, a former director of the Ron Paul campaign until 2007, which discusses this, which discusses how the Ron Paul campaign actually underestimated the power of a decentralized organization and really didn't capitalize on the kind of grassroots and intense following that it had. If it had capitalized on that following and had allowed more creativity and innovation to occur, we might be seeing a very different political landscape today. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts and my disappointments. But ultimately, the struggle for liberty has to be carried on, even if it's carried on without Rand Paul, or ultimately without the Ron Paul campaign, even if some of the champions of liberty have effectively committed political suicide from the standpoint of getting a liberty-based following, we still need to pursue these principles, and we still need to pursue these reforms in our lifetime, and we need to pursue them through all the channels that are available to us. Thank you very much, and I hope that the future will be much, much better than the present.